Busy little boulevard, Orange Grove Boulevard, corner of Orange Grove and Los Robles Avenue, Pasadena, California. Beautiful Pasadena, very, very busy intersection. All these cars probably have no idea. The right to the left, right there. One of the most heinous acts ever that I've heard about it when it comes to funerals and cremation happened right here. Not so long ago either. I don't really have a personal connection to this story per se, but it feels like I do. And the more I think about it, the angrier and angrier I get. Like for real. Right here.
I know you gonna dig this. Get funky with me.
What's going on, everybody? How you doing? Today here I am in Pasadena, California, city northeast of Los Angeles. Beautiful, beautiful Pasadena. You've probably heard of Pasadena. It's got the old town, it's got shopping, it's got restaurants, conventions, movie locations. It's fun. The mountains are right there, right there. Pasadena is great to come to. However, it does have a particularly sordid story that I'm going to tell you about. It has probably more than a few that I'm going to be covering. This one, though, is really, really awful. And it concerns somebody who is really, really awful. I'm crossing the street. And this person, who last I heard had got a life sentence, is out. Got out in 2022. Not really a life sentence. So this story takes place in the late 1980s. And I was only able to get over here today, later in the day. I was doing other things. So the sun is not my friend, but this is going to be a good angle. Take a look at that building right there. Some sort of wholesale electrical supply company. And before that, it was a funeral home. But before that, it was a different funeral home that closed down. It was called Lamb's Funeral Home. And it was founded in 1929. You can tell it's an older building, right? You can see that. I'm going to talk to you about a guy named David Sconce. He originally wanted to follow in his father's footsteps to become a football player, but he dropped out. After he dropped out, he spent a few years working various jobs. Tried to get into the police academy, but he failed his test because he was colorblind. His parents encouraged him to go back to school to become an embalmer, to embalm bodies, work in the funeral business. Why? Because his mother's side of the family had Lamb's Funeral Home, which is right there. Lamb's Funeral Home. That's the building. It's still here. When I tell you what happened inside this building, you're going to say to yourself, how is that still there? I'm going to try to get onto the other side of the building where it's a little more, the sun will be behind. So this David Sconce character, he saw an opportunity to make money in the cremation business. It was about late 1982. Yeah, they're electrical distributors now. And you can totally tell it was a funeral home just by looking at it. I mean, that's where the people would go in, that's where the hearses would park, right there. That's much better with the light like that, yeah. So, he used industry contacts and 2 furnaces that were located in this building, I'm assuming probably still are, to start his own cremation company called Coastal Cremations Incorporated. He didn't file the paperwork or anything until 2 years later. But his big idea for generating business was to offer the service for less than half what was considered the industry standard at the time. For just $55 per body, he would offer lower prices than every other crematorium around. Pretty much over the entire country. It was the cheapest place to get your loved one cremated. Right here. So, state law, even though, as I was reading more about this case, the funeral business seemed to be kind of like the Wild West back in the day, back in the 80s. But there was a law that said only one body could be burned at a time. And this is a process that took several hours per body. There's a couple of hours to get the body prepped, for central clinical, and I think it's like 3 to 4 hours per body. Okay? The body would be burned, then you wait for the oven to cool, you collect the ashes, then the oven is cleaned, of course, for the next person. I don't want to say body, for the next person. By 1985, his company, Coastal Cremations, was burning over 8,000 bodies a year. The ovens were running for upwards of 18 hours a day. So I crunched the numbers on that. It's about 25 bodies roughly a day, with 2 ovens. So what do you think they were doing? Well, they were cremating the bodies in bulk. 5 to 18 bodies at a time per furnace. They would dump all the ashes together in huge barrels, and when it came time to collect the ashes for the families, the employees were instructed to collect 3.5 to 5 pounds for female remains and 5 to 7 pounds for male remains. Now, on the date of November 23rd, 1986, this building caught on fire, the crematorium to be exact, after 2 employees tried to break the company record by putting 19 bodies in each furnace. It's believed the fire was caused by the bodies being packed in there so tight that it clogged the chimney. Now, the inside of these furnaces, they were only slightly larger than a phone booth, apparently. And apparently there's a sick sort of world record where live people stuff themselves into like an oven for the for cremation purposes. And that was 14 people. They were alive. So to think about how they were putting these people in and what they were doing, how they stuffed them in is grotesque, horrible, and awful. And this is people's loved ones. So you would think that it may be over. You know, the jig is up for David? No. He set up a new crematorium about 70 miles away in Hesperia, California. He operated the new business under the disguise of a ceramics factory and a massive diesel-fueled kilns. And he wasn't using them for ceramics. He also said that they were using them to make shield tiles for the space shuttle. This guy, I'm telling you, right here, I can't. It fascinates me that this building is still here. The chimney. Take a look. Bodies were cremated there for 2 months until December 23rd, 1986. A neighbor called in with an air quality complaint. The neighbor was told it was just a ceramics factory. He shouted, "Don't tell me I don't know what burning bodies smell like. I was in the ovens at Auschwitz." He was a Holocaust survivor. So a fire chief went to investigate the facility. Look at this. And inside, covered in soot and trash cans, filled to the brim with ashes and prosthetic devices. He kind of figured out what was happening, but when he opened one of the kilns, a human foot fell out and it was still burning. Many of his employees, nearly all of whom were paid under the table, later told authorities that David Sconce would pull gold fillings out of the mouths of the bodies. He called it popping chops. making the pliers sing. He'd then sell the gold to a jeweler buddy of his. Made about an additional $6,000 a month. Created a new side business in July of 1986 with his parents involved. Coastal International Eye and Tissue Bank. Tissue donations required the consent of the next of kin. So his mother was in charge of getting the deceased family's members to sign the proper paperwork. Or sometimes trick them into signing. If they refused, it didn't really matter. They would just forge a signature. Tissue harvesting they were doing as well. Over a 3-month period, they had sold 136 brains, about $80 each. I have to read this part. 145 hearts, $95 each. $100 lungs, $60 each. Now this is for use in med schools. Yeah, so they were selling body parts too, for use in med schools. Things like that. Testing. Now, the risk of getting busted for something like this was really, really low. Back in California in the 80s when I told you. They only had 2 state inspectors inspecting the funeral and cremation industry at the time. They had their suspicions, but every time they tried to come here and inspect this facility right here, they were turned away and told to come back with a warrant. It was hard to acquire because all of their paperwork seemed legit. But that one Holocaust survivor, thankfully, was the one that brought them down. Oh, I should also mention that David Sconce, he hired old football buddies. I told you he was trying to play football, right? As muscle. Not just to transport the bodies, but also to intimidate funeral home directors into doing business with him. And scare or beat up anyone who could potentially expose what he was doing. Years went on. Thousands of families dealing with funeral plans for their loved ones had no idea what was going on here and who they were giving their loved one's body to. There is a weird story I read here, so I'm going to read this part. The editor of a mortuary industry newsletter, hot off the presses, started asking too many questions about the company's business practices, so David Sconce sent 2 of his boys over to the man's house dressed as policemen. They attacked the man. They threw jalapeno sauce and ammonia into his eyes. One of the attackers later pled guilty to the assault and testified that Sconce paid him to do it. Now, in February 1985, David Sconce sent another one of his former football buddies, 245 pounds of him, to beat up a rival cremation owner who had been threatening to tell on him. 2 months later, that gentleman, Timothy Waters, was dead, presumably of a heart attack. Now, the autopsy report for him found traces of the heart medication called digoxin in his bloodstream. He wasn't on any sort of medication like that, though. But there is a substance called oleander that mimics the effects of digoxin. I'm going to say digoxin, D-I-G-O-X-I-M, and it's a tree commonly found in California with the oleander in it. So David Sconce was on trial for mass cremations and corpse mutilations in 1989, and one of his associates testified that he had bragged about slipping something into Tim Waters' drink at a restaurant shortly before he died. This led the state did charge Sconce with poisoning Waters the following year, but those charges were dropped because multiple experts failed to agree on whether or not oleander was actually present in his system. His parents were convicted in 1995 on 10 counts each of unlawfully authorizing the removal of eyes, hearts, lungs, and brains from body prior to cremation. They were each sentenced to 3 years and 8 months in prison and were left penniless after settling a $15.4 million lawsuit from the victim's family. They faced, I believe, 67 charges total, but they escaped most of these counts because they threw their own son under the bus. Blamed him. He pled guilty, David Sconce, to 21 charges of conducting mass cremations, mutilating corpses, and the aforementioned assaults that I mentioned. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison and released in 1991 after serving 2.5 years. Okay? 2.5 years. So this is 1991. This is the first time I'm telling you about it. You're going to hear about something else. He also pled guilty to soliciting a hitman to murder another rival, and he was given a sentence of lifetime probation. What does lifetime probation mean? Trying to hire somebody to kill somebody else? See if there's any. I don't know. Just look and see what this kind of says on the ground here. Let's go a little closer to the building. I guess we can. Nobody's come out yet to say, what are you doing outside here? But in 2006, David Sconce violated his probation. He was caught selling forged bus tickets in Arizona. He moved to Montana without permission, and then he stole a neighbor's rifle. I have no idea in what succession all that happened, but he broke his parole, his life parole. He was sentenced to 25 to life, and he's eligible for parole in 2022. So I have no idea if he's out now. I have no clue. So I'm not sure if he's out actually. I think I said at the beginning of the video, 2022 he was released, but he's eligible for parole. So I'm not sure if he's out. Now, I particularly find what he did. I mean, anybody that's listened to me talk about this story is obviously know this guy is horrible and awful. You know, I remember, and I rarely talk about things about myself when it comes to the channel, but I remember burying my father before COVID when he passed away. And then during COVID to 2020, when my mother passed away, we had no choice but to cremate her. It was just the way what was happening, at least in Canada, in Toronto, where I'm from. What was happening then, we had no choice. It had to be a cremation. There was only, or the alternative was to, for lack of a better term, freeze my mother until funeral services could be properly conducted. She died at the beginning of COVID as well, when it was really all over the place. Nobody knew what was going on. So it was either put my mother in a freezer for how we didn't know how long, or have her cremated, which was not what she wanted, which was not what we wanted. She was a sudden death, unexpected, but we did know what my mother wanted in terms of her will and also what she had told us personally. She never wanted to be cremated. So I remember the days afterward when my mother had passed and she was going to be cremated, waiting for the day when we weren't told exactly which day, where the crematorium was. It was done not on where the funeral was held, the small gathering we were allowed to have at first, so we had a bigger funeral in 2022. But anyway, I remember being really horrified and sad, thinking and waiting, wondering where my mother is, who's looking after her body, is she all alone, which, you know, she would be, waiting to be cremated. And it really upset me to think about it, to think about my mother being alone. She passed away, and she was still alone, waiting to be cremated. And I wanted to go and I wanted to sit with her for the entire time, but I couldn't because of COVID, and also it's just not done. So I think about all these families that, you know, maybe some of them are trying to save some money, but also it's a nice looking building, and it's a cremation service. It's around here. So whether or not they were trying to save money or whatever, they're trusting somebody with their loved one. They're trusting this guy and his employees with their loved one. And it's not just a body, it's your loved one. So when I read this story about 6 or 7 months ago when I first heard about it, it really struck a chord with me in terms of just these people you have to trust somebody with your loved one's body. And that even doesn't sound right. You have to trust someone with your loved one. And that's the ultimate betrayal, what this guy did. And the fact that he's eligible for parole, or possibly out, the fact that he only got 4 years or so at the beginning, it wasn't until he broke his probation, his lifetime probation. No, this guy deserved life. I'm sure I've inserted a few pictures of him already. Let's put another one in because he just looks like a dick. Rest in peace to all the people that went through that building, and the loved one, the people that gave their loved ones, you trusted them in there, they didn't get them back. They didn't get their ashes back. They got their ashes mixed. That's horrible. Really, really disgusting. And I hope this guy pays for it somehow. Thanks for watching, everybody. There it is behind me, the former Lance Funeral Home. I don't know. Prime Electrical Distributors. I hope they're doing a good job, whatever they're doing in there. Thanks for watching, everybody. From Pasadena, California. Rest in peace to everyone that passed through there. Peace.